I wasn't looking to teach anyone. I wasn't looking for another job. I had a full-time job. I had these kids. I had a lot on my plate. I was looking to help widows. So with that, I went home and I started thinking about where can I go? And my church didn't have anything. So I went to the church and they took me and they sent me for training. So I trained for a year and then I started with 4 elderly women, the group. And then from there, it just started to grow by word of mouth.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Hello and welcome to today's podcast. Today I will be chatting with Kathryn Monaco, and Kathryn is a widow and she's created something really special out of her whole process to be able to support other widows as well. So I'm excited to find out all her journey with you all, the listeners, because this is the first time she and I are chatting. So welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you, Kendra, for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
I'm so grateful that you're here. And we were just talking before we started to record that we are both with really bad allergies. We both took Claritin. We already have something in common there aside from grief. We both had to take Claritin.
Awesome.
I should tag Claritin on this podcast and give them props for our performance today.
That would be
Sponsored to you
good.
by Claritin. We made it through without sneezing through a podcast. So welcome. Thank you for taking the time this morning to chat with me.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit then about yourself. Tell me about your husband, your kids. This is the way back when, and then how you became a widow, and then we'll kind of go from there.
From there, okay. So I became a widow at 42 years old. I was married 19 and a half years to my husband, Larry. He was my knight in shining armor. I came out of a divorced family where my father abandoned us when I was 8 years old. I reunited with him when I was 21, but the damage was still there. And when Larry came into my life, he was just everything to me. He taught me how to be the best me. He taught me what family was about. He was an amazing father. We had 3 kids. And at 44 years old, he developed a blood clot in his armpit. And we went to a specialist and they did a sonogram. And the next day, they sent us home. And the next day, he passed away. My 11-year-old daughter told me that she was trying to wake him up, but she couldn't. And from that point, my whole life did a spin around. And I know that I had a very strong codependency on my husband partly because of my childhood and he was just he took over everything. I was a housewife. I didn't have to work. He just made my life easy, maybe too easy, because when I lost him, it was so difficult to then find my way.
Because you had to basically learn. Oh, give me a second. There's a little bit of echo. Are you using a headset by chance?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I thought I heard my echo, my own voice, but okay. So you basically had to then learn how to not only adjust to being without him, but also adjusting of doing everything and learning to do the things that he used to be the one in charge of doing.
Absolutely. I didn't pay the bills in the house. I didn't know what the bills were. I didn't know where the things in the house were, like to shut the water, the gas. I didn't know what to do with the cars. I never did the inspections. I didn't even know tires had to be rotated until I got a flat. Um, he just took over everything. All I did was raise my kids and keep a clean house. And I was a real housewife, but my kids were full time job. But still, I wish I would have been a little bit more in tune to what he did, which
Wow.
I had to learn from scratch. So I didn't even have a computer. I didn't have an email address because what would I need that as a housewife?
And this
So
was what year? What year was this that he
this was in
passed
the
away?
year 2000, where we didn't have social media, so my resources were limited. I
Hmm.
um, I didn't have social media or an internet to look up what to do with grief. I didn't have any of that. I had to figure a lot of things out on my own.
Wow. Now, how old were your children when your husband passed, when Larry passed?
Yeah, they were 11. My daughter was 11. My son Anthony was 14, and my oldest Michael was 18.
And they were all still home. So Michael,
Yes,
he was still
Michael
home
just,
still.
yeah, he just started college. He had graduated high school. He tried to do a year of college and he ended up dropping out. He could concentrate. I tried to get him therapy. He was rejecting it. Again, I didn't know what other resources for him. It just, there wasn't anything. It was really difficult. So for me, my sister put me in a bereavement group in a local Y, and they didn't take me until 3 months after my loss. That's the restrictions here in our area.
And where is it? What area do you live in?
I live in Long Island, New York.
Not in New
Yeah,
York. So at that time, the restrictions were to wait about 3 months, like before you could even start this bereavement group. So here you are, 3 months without. It's basically like you're in a boat without a paddle, right? On
absolutely.
the That's kind of how you felt, without paddles and not knowing
Mhm.
how to navigate this new journey, not only of grief, but of how do I take care of a household by myself, all those kind of things.
It was overwhelming. It was
Now,
totally overwhelming.
what did you do then those 3 months then if you didn't have the bereavement group yet? What other tools did you use and how did you even start then job searching and those? I don't know, like where I can't even imagine like, like how it would be to
How?
just start
Yeah,
out of a sudden when you haven't worked in, whatever, 20 years
eight.
or,
Yeah, 18. I was a respiratory technician. I couldn't go
Mhm.
back to that because I'd have to be reschooled. Because my daughter, I had to get her on the bus. I couldn't go back to school. So I had to have a job. So God blessed me with the gift to be able to paint. And
Mhm.
I started painting murals in kids' rooms and faux finishes. And that was how I supported myself and my kids. I took a van that we had, I pulled the seats out, put ladders in there and crates, and just started hustling my painting business.
I love this because Catherine, it just shows how, one, how resilient we are, two, how resourceful we can be if it really comes down to it. Like we really can be very resourceful as human beings. Like we find the means to do things.
I think so. I think it's like a survival. What choice did I have? And tools, the only thing that I did, and I still share this, with people, is that I would take a nap. Like
Yes.
when it really got really painful,
Mhm.
because, we don't sleep good in the beginning. We're tossing and turning and thinking and overwhelmed. And so we don't sleep good. And then we're trying to function during the day and everything's so overwhelming. When it got too much to bear, I would just take a nap and
Mhm.
then I would start again when I would wake up. That was my biggest tool.
It's like your reset button. It was like a reset. Like the nap could help you like as a reset button.
Yeah.
Like it's like I even use that in the middle of my day, even if it's 15 minutes sometimes, like when I need to ground myself, being an empath and stuff like, and I'm sure you too, because we'll go into that too, because now you help other people. When you're surrounded with so many different types of energy too, you kind of need to center yourself. That's like, I call that my meditation is a 15-minute nap sometimes. That's my meditation.
Hmm.
That's my
Well, it's
meditation.
relaxing and it takes you
Yes.
out of where you are for the moment. And when you when you wake up, all of a sudden you feel like, okay, I can handle this now.
Hmm.
Let me just do what I have to do. It's the thoughts. They take over your mind.
Yeah, and especially when you don't know like how to navigate them or what to do
Correct.
with them when they're so overwhelming, and especially because you still had to be able to function to be able to work and give your kids food and take care of them and
Absolutely.
take care of yourself. So it's like kind of like you couldn't just completely submerge yourself in the grief itself, full on. You had to kind of keep going. Now, what then shifted? At what point did things start happening when you joined then the bereavement group 3 months in? What did you find in that particular community for you?
Well, I met my husband now, and another gentleman and another woman we were all around the same ages, and we stayed connected. The group is over after 8 weeks, which I felt after 19 and a half years of marriage that 8 weeks was just not enough support.
Like they gave a
Yeah.
timeline. It was like only
Yep.
like,
You
yeah,
get
the
8 weeks
8 week
and
course,
you're
8 weeks
done.
to get over.
So it was funny because I was the one that kept saying to these other two guys and this girl, let's get together, let's do lunch, let's do dinner. What could we do to meet up? Like I needed some type of social activity because my Friday and Saturday nights were lonely and empty, and I was used to being out with my husband. During the week, I was working, but the weekends were real. I mean, I worked on the weekends too, but they were really a struggle at night because the kids would go out with their friends, and I found myself alone a lot.
Mhm.
So then I put myself in another bereavement group. And there's something that they do in these bereavement groups that I really struggle with. And that's that they sit around in a circle, like from that movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, they're all sitting around a circle. You think, okay, I'm in this movie now, right? And I didn't want to be a widow. I didn't want to be in the circle, but I do need help. And they're all
Mhm.
sharing the details of their loss. And being sensitive as I am, I just couldn't take their losses on top of my loss. It was just too much to take in. So with the second group, when I went and they did it again, I jumped up and I said, I'm out of here. I don't know who made this rule, but I'm out of here. And I stormed out of the room. I was hysterical crying. I cried all the way home. And I decided then if I ever got on my feet, I was going to go back and change it. And that was what I stuck with like the whole time during the years of grieving, that I was going to go back and do this. I didn't know where, I didn't know how, I didn't know when. I just knew that I was going to do it. And so
You
5 years.
basically decided, yeah, sorry to interrupt you. What you what you realize that is that what the tools that were there were just not a fit for you per se and what you needed for your own grieving process. You didn't want to be hearing other people's stories of their hardship, but more also probably did you feel like you wanted to hear more like what are we going to do about it, like, or what
Right.
tools do we use?
Well,
What did you feel was what you needed and what is it that you created?
so what I felt was the first group, when I went in, they shared their losses. And I did it the first time, and it was really hard to deal with. So I kind of feel like if you got 12 people in a room, you're listening to 12 losses and you're a grieving person, that's a lot to take on. It's one thing to listen to one loss. Like I tell you, my husband died, he had a blood clot, it was medical negligence. That's one loss. But if you're listening to 12 people, one after the other, one is suicide, it just gets overwhelming on top of a grief. Like I'm not trained to listen to all that. So
Mm,
when I went into the second group and they were doing the same thing again, it just was a trigger that I thought I had gotten to a certain point where I was doing a little bit better. And now this is bringing me right back to day one. So that's what made me feel like, why am I doing this again? Like, this isn't good. Like, there's no continuation from the 8 weeks that I was in. It just went back to the beginning again. And what I really wanted was someone to teach me how to survive this. Tools. Give me tools. How do I do this? I don't know how to do this without my husband. I was very dependent on him. and the changes were coming left and right, and I couldn't handle them.
I think this is such good input that you're sharing. Um, I myself am a facilitator in a bereavement group, and so for an organization. And so what you're sharing is very insightful for me, um, because I had not thought of what you just said, that you as a participant are not you're not trained to have to listen to all these other hardships. You know about your grief, but then listening to other people's journeys, it's like somebody that is like a facilitator, a counselor, a therapist, or any, they're trained to know how to listen to these things and to be able to deal with their emotions, but participants necessarily aren't are not. So so taking all that for you was just a lot. So thank you for that insight. It's helpful even for me, so I appreciate that. The so now tell us then, at what point then did you start then creating your own group?
My own group. So 5 years after my loss, I remarry. I married one of the men that I met in the bereavement group, Scott, and he has 3 kids. I adopt his 3 kids so that we could be a blended family. And Scott knew, my intention to go back. So now I'm working full time, raising 6 kids. And I don't even know where I got the the courage to do this, but I started seeking out how to do a group, help the widows. So I went back to the why because I felt, well, that's where I went. I guess my thought process was a little limited at the moment. I'll go there. That's where I got help. And so I went there and they rejected me. They said, you're not a social worker and you're not a psychologist and you can't do this. But you could, they called me later to tell me I could do a chat group for divorcees and singles and teach them how to paint,
Oh.
which was interesting because that that just is how, like, people don't get a widow and they didn't get my intentions. I wasn't looking to teach anyone. I wasn't looking for another job. I had a full-time job. I had these kids. I had a lot on my plate. I was looking to help widows. So with that, I went home and I started thinking about where can I go? And my church didn't have anything. So I went to the church and they took me and they sent me for training. So I trained for a year and then I started with 4 elderly women, um, the group. And then from there, it just started to grow by word of mouth. And after a year, I got a call from the Y that they wanted me to come there and do a group for them, and they wanted to pay me. So that was kind of ironic because they
That
started
is
to hear how it was growing, and all of a sudden, it didn't matter that I wasn't a social worker or a psychologist.
Mhm. Well, because you have the intuitive component too. Now, the training that you got, was it like to be a grief coach? Like, what kind of training
They
was
were,
it?
yeah, they were workshops. I guess they really wanted to see um, where I was in
Mhm.
handling, speaking about grief. It's not as intense like when I teach facilitating because I teach as well. I I teach all, like, what to expect. I go through everything. They didn't do that with me. I like doing actual program. They just sent me for workshops. I had to do them for 2 years, but I started the groups after the first year, and I would just go to these like 2-hour workshops, um, like seasonal, and I just completed it. And then she gave me the permission to start the groups, and they gave me a room for free and coffee for free, and I just bought the pastries and I made it. Like, I created what I had in my head that should have been. I didn't have a 3-month limit. I kept the groups connected after the 8 weeks. We have social gatherings. I just did everything that I couldn't find for me. I created.
That's wonderful. So, for example, so when somebody would start, they'd have to start and finish at the same time. You didn't have people kind of joining in halfway through a particular group set so that it wouldn't change the flow. Is that
No,
correct?
no, that is not correct. We do take
Oh, tell
people.
me. In the middle?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so how would it work then when somebody would then come in in the middle of it, if you had already, like, do people, okay, I'm just trying to like wrap my head around your program. How
Okay.
is your program unique? How is it, because it's still running,
Right.
unique, in terms of like when people come in, then how did you make that different as to not having to reshare, relive every single
Oh,
second?
right.
So tell
So
me
we,
how that goes. Like,
okay.
it's in that, I'm curious.
Okay. So first of all, we're doing the groups virtually now, but we've always been an in-person group. So the first thing I do is I do an icebreaker. It's like you ever see like that 3 minute speed dating?
Yes, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I
like, yeah,
I
something
there's a
like, "What's the favorite place you wanna go?"
yeah.
What if you had one food to take to a deserted island, what would it be? Like, those kind of things, like, just a
No,
really quick.
no, no. The
No?
icebreaker we do is I put 10 chairs. If I have 10 people, I put 5 chairs in front of the other 5 chairs parallel. And I give them 3 minutes to talk to each other, but not talk about their grief. And I ring a bell, and then one row moves down a seat, and then we do it again. And
Fun.
this
How
way everybody gets to meet each other before we sit around a table and talk.
What a fun activity. That's so fun.
It
And how
gets
are you
loud,
doing
they
that?
laugh. It really is
Yeah,
a good way.
love it. Now, how are you doing that virtually? Are you able to then create
Mm,
little breakout rooms and then switch them up?
honestly, no, I didn't even find out about breakout rooms till recently. But what we do, we don't have the icebreaker, but we give each person a chance to introduce themselves and a little bit about themselves. But we don't talk about the grief right away. Then we start talking about how you lost your spouse, but not the details. Just like what was it? Like for me, it would be medical negligence. Someone else, it's like suicide, overdose, car accident, murdered, whatever it is. But we don't get into how they were murdered
Mhm,
or,
mhm.
how they killed themselves. We don't get into that. We just only know that. And I say to them, listen, I tell them the truth. We don't want you to go into the details. We feel it's too much for you. But if you connect with someone else in the room, feel free at the break to talk to them.
Mhm, mhm.
Like, so if I saw someone that had the same thing my husband had, I might want to go talk to them, you know.
Right. Because for some people, the sharing and the sharing the details is one of the ways that they kind of come to terms to the reality of what happened. So for some people, that may be helpful, and so you allow that to happen, but more like in the one-on-one kind of
One on
situation.
one. Right.
Yes, instead of in
Right.
the group setting. I
And we
like.
recommend therapists for everyone so they could get to tell their
Mhm.
story. I tell them all they could call me anytime and tell me their story if they feel the need to tell their story. I'm here to listen to them. I just don't want to subject everyone to everyone's story.
Mhm. Yeah, I can see that. That is, I actually find that even true with even just this podcast. A lot of times people that um that I know that may be grieving are not, for example, wanting to even listen to even just the podcast episode, because it can be a lot even for themselves to hear somebody else's journey, on the podcast. So depending on who I'm interviewing, sometimes people do share more details because that is what they, feel like they want to do. In other cases, they don't. So I am taking notes as you're speaking, because it's also helpful for me to have that into account as a podcast host and when I'm asking and so forth, so that the listeners themselves don't have to carry something else with them. Rather, feel lighter to some extent rather than
Right.
heavier when they get off of listening to the
Some of
podcast.
them will say that when they call, they'll say, "Do I have to share my story?" And I'm like, "No, you don't have to share your story. We don't do that. You could just say how they passed, and that's it. And if you don't want to share that, you could just not share that. You could say, I'd rather not. I don't want anyone to feel pressured or
Hmm.
judged or I
Yes,
just
yes,
want them to be comfortable in the space that we have for them and to know that we're there for them."
yes. No, that's very, very good. Now, take us then into what it's become then. What has, and tell us the name. And this is again in Long Island, but now that it's virtual, are you going to maintain a virtual
Yes.
component too? Oh, okay. So
Yes,
tell us
because we're
about it, because
helping
I need
people
to get our
from, yeah, we have people
everywhere.
from,
Oh, good.
yeah, we have people from Canada now. We have people from Florida, from Texas, from all over. They're in and out of all my groups. So right now I have 8 groups. 2 groups are extra, are for kids, 14 to 17, and then we have a group for young adults. It's just kind of like a chat group. I have
Mm-hmm.
2 groups for those that don't have children. We have a lot of members that don't have children, and then they're in a bereavement group with people who have children issues. And some of them couldn't have children or had a miscarriage, and they don't want to be in a group with those that are talking about their kids. So we made a separate group for them. And that group has been growing like exponentially since we started it last year. So I had to make 2 out of it because one was it was too many people in one session, so I had to make 2 groups out of it. So we separate our groups by ages. So like I have a group of 30 and 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 65 and over, and the groups for those with no children.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the 8 weeks, typically when we're not in a pandemic, we have gatherings. We have 3 gatherings a year. We have a Halloween party slash gathering. We have Everybody Brings Edition gathering, and we have a huge picnic, which I made it a fundraiser to help those that had financial hardship in my group.
Mm.
And we had over 1,000 people 2 years ago when we did it, but last year we were forced not to do it because of the pandemic. But I'm hopeful that we'll get back to that at some point. But right now,
That's why. So for people to sign up, then they go to your website. I just want to make sure I don't forget, and I'll put your
okay,
website on
it's
the show
widowed.
notes.
It's widowed, not alone.
Widowed Not
Because
Alone, and
because
they
I
can.
felt in the beginning, that I was really on my own. I was alone. And I felt that no widow should have to go through this alone. So we're widows and widowers. I have men too in the group. I have a lot of men in the group, considering that men don't typically do bereavement groups, but they feel comfortable because they're not the only man. And just like myself, how I met my husband in my bereavement group, we have some couples that came out of my groups and a couple of babies. So I always say that, yeah, I say it's serendipity. That's not what the group is about, but I can't help with people click together.
Right. No, it's one of the things is too is just you find a commonality. So my dad is a widower and his wife is a widow. Um so they did bond over that component too, right? Because they had a common
Yeah,
experience too. So would you want to share a little bit more of how that journey was? Would it be with you and Scott? And
sure.
how did you navigate them, the kids too, into that aspect? I mean, they were older, but how did you navigate the blending of the families too in your journeys?
So Scott's kids were much younger than mine. His oldest was 11, and my youngest was 11. And then he had a 5-year-old, and Zachary's a year and a half older, so he was like 6 and a half. And we got married. It was 5.5 years for him and 5 years for me. So the kids were a little bit older, but they knew me through the years of just being friends. And then when we started dating, but once they came into the house, it was a little difficult because Scott's kids had no mom for 5 years. So they had 31 nannies. The nannies were robbing from them. One cooked a chicken in his fireplace. He was just having so many issues with the nannies. So the kids didn't have, they didn't have a lot of structure. And I'm a very structured person. So when we first got married, and the first year was so hard, like getting the kids to sit and have dinner at the table. So I was always traditional. We sit at the table, and I set the table and we all sit together and we talk. I always felt that was important in my house. And his daughter would get up and say, I don't want to eat that. I want to have a bagel and cream cheese. And I'd be like, no, this is what you're eating. And then she would have a temper tantrum on the floor. And Scott was pretty cool about, saying, okay, this isn't a restaurant. This is what mom made, and this is what you're going to have. And if you don't want to have it, then you don't eat until I think it was kind of like a struggle between her thinking she was the mother of the house after her mother died and me coming in now and being the mom. And I didn't want to be bossy with them, but I also wanted them to have structure. And so it was a lot of struggle in the beginning. Like I would say to my son, Zach, did you brush your teeth? And he would say, yes. And I go, okay, let's go check. And then I'd see that he didn't brush his teeth. He was eating candy for breakfast. I'm like, well, you're eating candy? And he'd be like, yeah, my dad says it's okay. Like they were lying to me. I'm like, I'm sure your dad didn't say it was okay to have jelly beans for breakfast. So there was a lot of struggle trying to get them on board. But
And
it
how
was
was it for
work.
yours with then Scott? How was it for your kids adjusting then to Scott being now in the
Well,
home?
my daughter was angry. She didn't want me to get married again. It was a big adjustment for her to adjust to a sister.
Hmm.
And because Jordana was so young, she was like clingy a little bit, and my daughter wasn't used to that, so she really had to adjust to that. And the boys were kind of like, okay, they were just everybody was tolerating each other in the household. There was a lot of friction, and we just kept sticking to it, Scott and I. We would discuss the kids, with a therapist, and we just kept working towards this is our family. This is our family. And when my daughter would speak nasty to Scott, I would say, excuse me, you can't speak to my husband that way. If you have something to say, you have to say it with respect. And we just stuck to our guns. And they just grew up. Now my girls are sisters. I mean, like, my daughter got married and her sister was her maid of honor. Like
That's
they love
wonderful.
each other. And my boys they're all together. They're call each other brothers. It's
Even though
just
there's a little bit more of an age gap between the boys, but the
yes.
girls are they're the same. So is
No,
the
my
both
daughter is 32 now and my other daughter is 25. So
Oh,
there's
okay, okay.
there's a
So
big
that
age
okay.
difference there.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. So it was his oldest 11-year-old was a boy. So
Right.
it was boy, got it, got it. I thought that maybe the girl. So so yeah, so it's all about just really also just being persistent and consistent, and then kind of like you said, sticking sticking with
Sticking
it.
with it. Oh man, it was challenging at times. It really was.
It is. It isn't. I mean, it isn't easy necessarily, to suddenly. I mean, even me as an adult, and my dad hears this podcast, so my dad know he'll be hearing as I'm sharing this. But when my dad was going to remarry, it was an adjustment for us too, and we were adults. My mom passed away 4 years ago, so when he got married a little bit over a year ago, it was not about the fact of somebody else being in our, in our life. It was just the fact that it was another level of our own grief that we had to be dealing with. It was about our grief, not about his wife. It was about us and our grief. So
Right.
there's definitely an adjustment even as an adult of a child, as,
I
as the
think that's
child
the
of
I think that's like the hidden, like, like there's the hidden second losses that we go through. I think that's
yes.
another hidden thing, like even amongst widows, like because I do the groups and it's like hidden, like they think, oh, she met someone, she got married, she's good now. Well,
Mhm.
no, I still had to support my kids. Scott was going to support my three kids, so I'm still working and I'm putting my daughter and my son through college and I'm still paying their medical bills and all their things and I'm working on this family to try to make it a one family and it's not as easy as you think it is and it's like it's I think that's like the misconception, like just because you meet someone and even when I was dating him it was like everyone that was helping him with his kids stopped helping him, like they thought I was helping him.
Oh,
I couldn't help him, I had my own kids and my own work. I was still supporting
interesting.
my household. So I think there's, people just think, oh, because you met someone or you got married again, now you're good.
Hmm.
And you're not. And I was still grieving. I still was grieving Larry, even though I
Absolutely.
married Scott. Scott just understood, like if it was my anniversary or the day that he passed, that that was a bad day for me, and he knew it, and I knew it for him. But I was still grieving. I didn't wait till I felt like I was better, or I would have never did anything.
I hear that so many times talking with widows and widowers that have remarried. I actually did an interview with a couple. So basically, like you and Scott, like that. But like I interviewed them both at the same time. I would interview, Liz, and then her boyfriend, and then the two of them together, the how they met. But they also are widow and widower, um, and the same thing. They talk about their spouses. Theirs is more recent. A young. They have young kids, um, and they still honor all these special occasions and stuff too. So how did you both then also honor then what was Scott's first wife's name?
Sally.
Sally. How do you
Mhm.
honor Sally and Larry in your family, and how did you honor them through the years as the kids were growing up in this new dynamic, like you said, like for example
Right.
anniversaries for you or birthdays and so forth?
Yeah.
Are there
So,
pictures still of, what I mean, pictures of the families, of them in the home, those kind of things?
well, the kids would keep their pictures in their rooms, but we didn't keep pictures in the house itself. We both sold our houses because we felt that if either one of our families moved into the other house, then the kids would be territorial and it wouldn't be on equal ground. So we both sold our houses and we bought a house together so that we all moved in at the same time. And Scott's Jewish and I'm Catholic. And I loved what he was doing. He was lighting these little Yesite candles that burn for 24 hours in memory of Sally. And so then I was like, I want one of those for Larry. So the kids would know when the candles were burning, it was either for Sally or Larry, and they would say, who's the candle for? And they would know, like, it's Larry's birthday or Sally's birthday. And it was the day Larry died, and they would know because of the candle. But for myself, I would go to the cemetery. I would have a mass said for Larry. I would just do my own thing, and Scott would do his.
That is wonderful that you also honored also the different ways in which you were each honoring because of your religious backgrounds too, yet you also incorporated some of the ways in which he would, the ceremonial or traditional ways that he was doing it into your own way. So I love that. I love
It was
that.
such, yeah, it's a beautiful tradition, and I really like it. And I share it with the groups that we do that.
Oh, that's so good. Now, how does your grief look like now, these many years later? What does it look like now?
I still honor Larry on the days that, like I just experienced 21 years that he's gone, and it's just amazing, like how you could be so many years later and feel like it was yesterday at the same time. And I hear people say that at 4 years and 5 years and 8 years, but you don't think when you're 21 years, you're still going to feel that way. But I still do. I still love him just as much as I did when he passed. And on the days like the anniversary of his death or his birthday, I allow myself to grieve those days for him. And I pray and I go visit the cemetery or whatever, but I give myself that time, like my Larry time, and then I go about my life.
I love that you just still give yourself that space. And you said something important. It's that, yeah, there's no time. I wrote the other day a little I don't know, things that just kind of come into my head sometimes. I wrote it on my Instagram, like there's no timeline for loving, so why should we expect a timeline for grieving? You know,
Absolutely.
there's like we don't like say, oh, you love that person, oh, and now they're not, like, oh, well, stop loving them now. It's like, what do you mean? Like, it's not like an on and off switch. That doesn't just it's not doesn't
It's
happen
so
that way.
true, Kendra, that is so true because you don't say to someone, how much do you love them? But
Right,
people will say to me, how long is he gone? Like as if I should be over it.
right.
It's 21 years. That sounds like a long time, but it's still traumatic to me.
It is that, and the thing is that there's this expectation then that grief is a timeline, like as if it's supposed to then end. And like sometimes in society that especially, okay, let me just give an example. For example, even at a work, let's say you have a 9 to 5 job, a job that you have to go in, somebody dies in your family. How many weeks do they give people off to be able to, you know, grieve? Probably just a week or something like that to
Not
deal with,
even.
like, not even? Okay.
Not in New
Not even
York, they
that?
don't. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Just to deal with like maybe just the funeral arrangements unknowingly, like there's going to be all these different waves that are going to come in and out and so forth. So, yeah, it is not, it's, yeah, there's no time. There's no
There
timeline
is
for
no
it.
time. And I think that as far as the workplace, there's a lot of people that have come to me and said, like, in the medical field, that they had to go back to work within 3 days of losing their spouse.
Oh,
I can't imagine. And they're young. Like, I'd get someone 36 years old who lost her husband, and they wanted her to go back to work. And she was worried about losing her job on top of losing her husband. It's
oh,
it's
wow.
so
That's a lot.
stressful. Some of the things are just so stressful that you hear over the years.
And for some people, and you probably encountered some people too, in which their job does become their way of kind of managing their grief. Like I've known of people that like they actually want to still continue their routine because already something has so much has happened and changed that they don't necessarily want to add another big change and like stop going to work, because work becomes their sanity. Like that work becomes like their space in which they at least feel like they're something is like the same to some extent. So for
Correct.
some people that is what they need, but others don't. Like others do need space, and that's something that in society we don't necessarily allow for it to look different. How people grieve, that it will look different. It was not going to be
That's
the same.
correct. Like, I think that people kept saying to me personally, when are you coming back? They were looking for the old me, and that person died with
Oh,
Larry. I always say that Scott didn't marry the same person Larry did, because I was
oh,
broken. I wasn't the same woman. I changed. Here I became a business owner. I'm running a household. That wasn't the same person Larry married. I wasn't codependent on my husband now like I was on my first husband. I'm independent in my marriage. So I'm a totally different person. I always say, like, if Larry ever came back to the earth and
mhm.
saw me in action, he would be like, "Who is that? Who
I'm
is
sure
that
he
person?"
I'm sure, in my perspective, he's watching you and he's just cheering you on. He's so proud of you. In my perspective, he's just watching on the bleachers and being like, "Yeah, you go, Catherine. Look at you,
Yeah.
girl. I knew
Yeah.
you had it in you."
This is a woman that didn't know how to pay a bill or do an email, and I ended up running a business and running these groups and, like, running a household, sold a house, bought a house. I mean, I did so many things within my griefhood that I myself don't even know how I did it.
Amazing, right? We surprise ourselves of what we're capable of, and we don't give ourselves um, credit sometimes for seeing how much growth has happened. And just you hearing your story of how much you've done in the last 21 years since you experienced, that traumatic day and his sudden death, and you changing completely, like to who you are now. Um, that's amazing. That's amazing. I honor you for that because
Thank you.
it's yes, you, like some people say, I had no choice. I had 3 kids. I had to I had to put one step forward and keep going and figuring it out as I went. Um and that's the thing, you just figured it out as you went. It's not like you had this plan, you didn't have
Right.
any guidebook to know what it is
Nope.
you
I couldn't even read, honestly. My reading was challenged by the trauma of finding my husband. So I couldn't even read about grief. So all of it I kind of did on the blind. But what I give to our groups is I give them the things that I wish somebody would have told me. Like even the fact that I felt like my daughter lost her father, she also lost her mother for a while.
Yes.
Um, things like that, like the things that I wish somebody would have said to me. Your children, their childhood is compromised by loss. Try to be there for them as much as you can. Take vacations with them. I wish I would have had someone telling me that. Like I didn't. I was just always worried about work, supporting my house, supporting my kids, and I didn't have enough time like to have fun with them and enjoy their. My daughter was still only 11. She still had a childhood left.
Mm. You said something that I heard another friend that I interviewed to, also a widow. She said the same. Like for her was basically she did not. Her son was only I think 3 when his dad passed, and so she was like, I could not allow my son to not only grow up now without a father, but without a mother, because I could not lose myself in that. So that's what kept her going, was knowing that she couldn't lose who she was. Um, that was what she focused on, because if not, her son would lose 2 people, and not just one. That's what kept her moving forward.
I see a lot of young people come to that conclusion on their own, and I don't know if they were just more aware than I was, but that didn't come to me. I was in so much pain, I couldn't see past the pain.
Well,
And
that's honestly, Catherine, it's like, and you probably see this also with your widows and widowers. Everybody's journey is so different, and depending on also on what they've lived. And you even mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, you had a major component of trauma too when you were growing up too. So, of your dad leaving. So therefore, there's other things that you had in your own journey. So your journey
right,
cannot be compared to Scott's journey, cannot be
correct.
compared to
They're
your
all
daughter's
different,
journey.
right?
Everybody's so different
Your your
regardless.
past definitely contributes to your grief. Sometimes I see people with multiple losses. It's a little, the complicated grief. It all contributes to how we get through this. That's why I always feel like it's you can get through it alone, but it helps so much when you get through it with a group and you have the support of others that say, you know what, I've been there already. I've gone through it, and this is what helped me. I try not to give people advice. I try to just make suggestions and say, this works for so many people. Like over the years of staying connected to the groups, I've learned a
Yes.
lot. I have therapists that come in on a regular basis to, speak to the groups on different topics. I learned a lot from them. And I just, we share all those things because we want people to, have the support that they need.
It's resources, it's research. And like you said, like there's going to be something, some of those tools that you offer are going to be beneficial to some. Like, for example, if I say to somebody, journal, like I used to write when my sister died, I would write letters as if I was writing to her. I was 21. Okay. Nobody told me that that's what you do. Intuitively, that's what I did. Nobody said, write a letter
Right.
to your sister. No, I would just write letters as if I was like a journal entry and be like, oh, Zorana, today I did that, that, that. And by the way, I really miss, like, so either I would write of just of what was going on with my day to her, or I would write about my emotions about how I missed her. But that was again intuitive. But for somebody else, if I were to say, like, you know, write a journal, or like, I don't like writing, that's just not their way. I'm
Right.
like, oh, okay, dance it out then, who knows? Like everybody's different. So, like, what
Right.
you do with your grievers is, you offer different options. You
Yes.
give the different tools that are out there and take what serves you. That's really what it is. Take what serves you, and then if it doesn't, it's okay. It's okay,
Right.
but there's
Right.
here are options, and this helped me. It may or may not help you. If it does, wonderful. If not, then try maybe this thing that's helped, X, Y, and Z person too.
Right. Right.
And
But
I think
some
yeah,
tools are like exercise or the journaling. Some of them are like really helpful.
yes.
And, you know, you can't tell someone what to do, but we do share like writing a letter to your spouse.
Hmm.
And just doing that is so cathartic, because it's a form of journaling. And I'm like, write to them, tell them all the people that weren't there for you. you
Just
know,
vent. Go ahead.
yeah, get it
Vent it
out.
out.
Because, really, it's so cathartic if you write all this stuff and this person wasn't there for me and this person was, I didn't expect, and this is what happened. And you could just keep on writing and crying and laughing and you just could get it all out.
Yes, without judgment, because
Yeah,
the
without
paper.
doing a daily journal, but just writing a letter.
Yes, no, that's so true. Um, yeah, no, there's just all these different ways and experiences, and like you said, you can't say you're an ex. You can't. Okay, let me just put it this way: you have seen a lot of way more widows and widowers, and you've also done this for a long period of time, and even yet, and I say this myself, we're not experts on that. We're only right. We're still not
Right,
experts because only the person experiencing is the expert on their own grief. But we have enough vision of having seen people to give again those resources of what has worked. It's kind of like, this is the evidence I have.
correct.
This is the things that I've seen along the years that have helped people, and here it is. And this is wonderful. I just think it's wonderful that you're offering this, and now that this virtual world has opened up the doors for you to have, an online program as well. How wonderful. Because now the listeners hearing this, if you're feeling that you are wanting this kind of community, and you're a widow or a widower, or or a teen too, right? Teen, because so for the teens are kids without one of the
Yes,
parents.
a teen that lost a parent, or
Uh-huh.
yes, we have a woman that's in our group. She lost a husband in her 30s, and she happens to be a school psychologist. She also lost her dad when she was in her 20s, so she stepped forward and asked to facilitate a group. And she does the teens, so she's a school psychologist, so she's excellent with the kids.
That's
and
wonderful.
and she understands, and they like her because she understands what their mom was going through, and she also understands what they're going through, losing her own dad.
Yeah.
And then I have another facilitator that lost her dad when she was in her 20s, and she does the 20 to 30-year-olds. And it's just like that group is like a chat group. Twice a month they meet. It's not like a structured bereavement group. And then I've been doing one-on-one coaching. I do it for a donation. All our groups are free. We're not a non-for-profit. We are no profit. Like, I have never organized myself as a non-for-profit because I did it through the church, and they hold the funds from the fundraisers and all that.
Okay.
So
So people
uh,
can just sign up for then a program, because I
yeah.
actually, as you're speaking, names are coming up in my head of people that I could, because a lot of times, like the group I'm a member of is only here in the Dallas area, so I can't, if somebody's out of the out of the state, I'm like, the organization that I facility, that I volunteer in is only in this area. So I'm always looking for resources to
Mhm.
be able to pass on to people. Usually I send them to childrengrieve.org if they have children, like to kind of just see what things are in their areas. So I love that now I have one other resource to send them.
Thank you.
And I'm
Thank you.
definitely going to add it to my resources list too on my website too, so that people can go there and be able to do this, especially now that they can go from wherever they are. So I love this.
Right.
Thank you so much. Anything else you wanted to share with the listeners that I might have not been asked you, that I've forgotten to ask you?
Yes, I want to share that not only do we do the 8-week bereavement, but then we have a group called Chat and Connect. And that group is for those that finished bereavement and are a little bit longer. Because we keep the groups together after the 8 weeks, we make a captain and a co-captain in each group. And we pick a person within the group that wants to keep the group going. And so then we leave them off on their own and they keep meeting. And then all those groups, let's say I have 8 groups right now, that's at least 80 people, then we all meet together with the people that I had previously. So we're always gathering and we're always bringing each other together. But sometimes over the years, because I'm doing this for 15 years, the groups start breaking up. People move out of state, somebody gets married. And then there's only like maybe 2 people left in the group. So we made this other group called Chat and Connect so that they could go into another group and meet new people, from all the groups that are all the
Mhm.
stragglers. They still have round table talk and they could
The
still meet.
stragglers, I love that. The stragglers, the ones that have graduated or from the
Well, it's
program.
just like there's still people left that they still want to connect,
Yes,
and why should they be left alone? Again,
I
it's not
know.
being left alone. And then I have a member that created a group within the group that the widows that are longer made like a meal train, and they help the widows that just come in, that if they're sick or they need extra help, they help each other. They give them care packages, and she named that Wednesday's Children because we do the groups on a Wednesday evening. And so that came out of this group as well. So there's so much growth within the grieving community.
That is, and I love that you said that you still have this other group, the Chat and Connect, because like we were just talking before, you never know when again you may need
Yes,
be able to talk to somebody, because even just like as I mentioned, even when my dad got married and a different level of my own grief kind of coming up to the surface, there may be other occasions down the line, like if your children get married and you don't even have the other parent there to be present on such a special occasion, it could bring up a whole other um part of their grief too, or
absolutely.
whatever, when they graduate from college and here you are alone seeing your child, whatever it is that maybe may bring
Absolutely.
up
I,
those emotions.
I always say 3 years after my loss, we had a snowstorm and I had to shovel. And no one thought to say, oh, there's a widow, she's a widow, because it's 3 years later, but I'm still a widow, and I still have these responsibilities. It was so much work to have to shovel myself out to get to work on top of all the other responsibilities. So you need somebody to validate. Yeah, that was a lot for you to do. Like you're
Oh.
still having meltdowns. And even when I had my grandchildren, that my husband wasn't there,
Hmm.
they're his grandchildren. Um, and my last one that we just had last May is a redhead, like my husband was. So
Oh.
it's just like little things like that. It's nice to have people that understand what you're going through during your grief, that it's always with you, like it doesn't go away just because the years pass.
Right.
So
And in your case, like you and Scott are, at least you have each other to kind of comprehend that within your same household. But there are people that don't, that may not remarry, and to have these
right.
groups that they can reach out, or maybe they do marry, but somebody that has not gone through a grieving experience themselves, so they may not relate to what you're experiencing. So having these opportunities of talking to others that can relate to what you're going through is really important. Thank you so much once again, Kathryn. And again, it's Widowed Not Alone. Widowed Not Alone is the name of your website. And again, I'll put that in the little whatever. I never remember what to call that. The stuff, the information about the podcast. Just scroll on the info of the podcast when you're listening to this, listeners, because I forget what that's called. And I will also add it to the resources on my website as well, the website. So thanks once again.
Thank you, Kendra.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.